Truth seeker, atheist here again, and I wanted to speak about something that always kind of bothered me as a Bible student. I guess this can apply to Jehovah's Witnesses too. Charles Taze Russell taught that those who were responding to what he called the harvest call were those that were being called to the heavenly calling, and that the number of this heavenly calling was to be 144,000. Unlike the rest of Christian beliefs that everybody who is a professed Christian and lives according to Christian life, rather than going to hell when they die, they go to heaven and spend eternity in a bliss. Bible students and Jehovah's Witnesses look at it differently. There's a very limited number of people that are going to heaven. Out of the billions and billions of people that have existed throughout history, only 144,000 are being called to the heavenly calling. Russell got this idea from Revelation 7. Now, most of Revelation is this psychotic, symbolic book where all kinds of bizarre things are shown in this vision. All kinds of wild beasts and seven candles and churches representing the seven churches, and the four beasts that had the head of a bull, and so on. The four horsemen, all kinds of wild and crazy things. It was almost like a mescaline trip. But the one thing out of all of the book of Revelation that Russell took literally was, or two things actually. One was Revelation 7 with 144,000 that are being called to heaven, 12,000 from each tribe of Israel. And in Revelation 20, the length of the 1,000-year kingdom, that the 144,000 servants would be co-rulers with Jesus in the 1,000-year kingdom. So Russell only took the two parts of Revelation really literally. And what really bothered me about the 144,000 wasn't that there wasn't so much of a chance that there was a low chance of getting to heaven, and that the greater masses by far would be resurrected in the 1,000 years to an earthly existence and would live perfectly forever if they made it through the 1,000-year kingdom without sinning. But the 144,000 were being selected from imperfect human beings. And these imperfect human beings were going to be raised, according to Russell, to the same exact nature as God himself. So God was rewarding these faithful 144,000 with an existence exactly like his, and with an exact form, whatever form that is, because the Bible doesn't express what a spiritual being is like in form. So, but what the Bible did suggest, according to Russell, is that these 144,000 were going to be just like God, that Jesus was the first or head of the church, and the church with 144,000, and that when he raised them from the dead and made them like himself, they would be like him or like God in every way, and that meant they could not die. Now, my problem with that is that God is supposed to be omnipotent. He was supposed to be, according to the Bible, omnipotent from everlasting to everlasting, forever, from all time preceding anything to all time from this point in the future. I have a problem with that idea of all time preceding us anyway, because first off, I'm a physicist, so I believe in the Big Bang, but the idea that there is a forever in the past means that you could never get to the present, because you're always in the past. You never progress through time. If time is a progressive thing, we know through the second law of thermodynamics that time has direction. And so, like we never see a broken egg reassemble itself. Things go from a state of order to a greater state of disorder, and it provides directionality, and that affects time, because time is the interval between events. And so this concept that there's an everlasting means you could never get to the present. So I always have trouble with that concept. But my other problem is with this idea of the 144,000. This is a little bit easier to understand and more tangible, in that if God has the ability to raise imperfect human beings to the same exact physical state of God himself, and that God, being immortal, cannot die, and according to Russell, and according to Jehovah's Witnesses, God is incapable of dying. And if the 144,000 are being raised to be exactly like Jesus and God, then they will be incapable of dying. Therefore, God can no longer take their lives away. It's kind of like that Indiana Jones movie, where they finally make it to this ancient crusader. He's the last of the Knights Templar, and there's this room filled with goblets, the Holy Grail, all these chalices, and he says, "Choose wisely." And Indiana Jones had to choose wisely. Well, I always think of that with God and picking the 144,000. How can one guarantee that he will make the right choice in all cases in the 144,000, that one of them might not defect in billions of years in the future? I mean, after all, having free will, Satan, who was not made immortal, according to Russell, it didn't prevent him from turning against God. So how can God guarantee that he will always choose wisely? But regardless of that, once God raises one being to the same state as himself, and is unable to take their life, then there's something then that God cannot do. And then if there's something that God cannot do, he is no longer omnipotent. And so there's this paradox, and I've this used to bother me, and then I recently read that this is something that is a formal paradox called the Omnipotence Paradox. The rock that, if God exists and there's nothing he can't do. He can make a rock that he can't lift, but if he can make a rock he can't lift, then he can't lift it. Therefore, there's something that God can't do, which means he is not omnipotent. So this is the same sort of thing, except with 144,000 and their immortality and not being able to take their lives. And it doesn't even mean that he has to actually do it. If God has the potential to do such, just the potential to do it, he is then not omnipotent. So this idea of God's omnipotence has always been a problem for me, and especially in the beliefs that I was raised. We were just supposed to accept, just naively accept that this was the way it was, and if we can't understand it, it's because our minds are just too weak for us to comprehend. We're just too low to be able to comprehend such a being as God, and that he was too high. But then that contradicts God's statement, let us reason together, and that we were made in the image of God, and all that kind of stuff. So these are many of the problems that I have with not only the Bible students, but with the whole idea of God in general, and a supreme being, and the idea of omnipotence. Because if you limit omnipotence, then omnipotence can't really exist. And if omnipotence can't really exist, then is there really a God? And, to me, those are the kinds of questions that cause doubt. I finally was able to face those kinds of questions, and in my mind, I resolved them in a way, because I think when I look back at the Bible and see that the Bible doesn't describe anything correctly, and that if God was the maker of the universe, at least he'd get Genesis right, to whatever extent Genesis presents the creation of the universe and of Earth. At least he'd get the overall details right. And just to say that, well, maybe God's testing us, or maybe, we don't understand, is just dumb. And why would God want to test us? That's just an evil God there. And anyway, Genesis only shows me an evil God, a God that's malicious and is tempting, and so on. So anyway, I just wanted to make a quick video on that, about God's omnipotence and this idea of omnipotence and how it just falls apart in my mind. There's just can't be any such thing as omnipotence. Then if there can't be, then what is there with this concept of God? So anyway, this is Truth Seeker. I wonder if any of this made any sense to you. I hope it does. I hope it raises some questions for you. And I wish you all well.